Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange, and the host who might be a ghost. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all manner of unusual literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, and I wanted to focus on another collection that I've checked out from my local library, similar to Afsana and We Love Anderson Cooper. This short story collection is interesting in that it focuses on superheroes, comic books, and how women are portrayed in comic books. It is The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherynne M. Valente. So yeah, here is the book. Pretty interesting how it is designed. It's illustrated by Annie Wu. It has some pretty interesting illustrations located throughout the book. In particular, like here you go, right here. Some pretty well designed illustrations that really feel like it looks like a comic book. So very interesting. I think it really adds to the overall book. So who is Catherynne M. Valente? Much like with We Love Anderson Cooper by R.L. Mazes and Afsana by the Iranian women authors, I didn't know who any of them, who this person was before I read the book. What I did was I went to my library's website and I typed in short stories, and this popped up. And I'm like, okay, well, place it on hold and go pick it up, which I did, and that's what I also did with the other short story collection that I'll be talking about next week, which I think is is it the best method for checking out books? Probably not, but you are always I am always pleasantly surprised when I pick something out at random. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad, but it'll certainly be something I wasn't expecting. Who is Catherynne Valente, as I was saying? I thought she was along the line with R.L. Mazes, which I thought she'd be a fairly new author, but it turns out she has a lot of experience under her belt, going back as far as 2006. She's written a number of works in speculative fiction, and she's won a number of awards too to go along with it. So she's a pretty extensive author and celebrated author. She has some notoriety under her belt. One thing I was interested in, that I found intriguing as I looked her up, is she is known for a subgenre of cyberpunk and steampunk known as myth punk. She writes a lot about mythology and folklore and that type of thing. And so myth punk, as it turns out, is a subgenre that focuses on exploring societal norms, exploring gender norms, exploring that kind of thing through a lens of a mythology of fairies. She writes about fairy tales and she writes about space. So and here she writes about comic books. So exploring, in this case, American mythology and through a social justice-y kind of lens, which I found to be interesting. I didn't know that myth punk existed before this. So hey, Short Story Tuesday already has me learning about new genres or new subgenres even that I might not have known about before. So if there's one good thing that comes out of Short Story Tuesday, probably that, among other things. So with a name like The Refrigerator Monologues, I expected this to have a vein similar to the Vagina Monologues, which were about women talking about their experiences as women, exploring sexuality and romance and ideas like those. So color me surprised again when it turns out to be about comic books and about how women are, how women are portrayed. So I was kind of right. It focused on women, but it did not go in the direction I was expecting. So this was a very interesting surprise, as I mentioned before. So the story that I'm reading today is called Paige Embry is Dead. I'll provide a little summary, a little analysis, and let you know what I thought about afterwards. This story follows the titular Paige Embry. She is a scientist working in a defense industries lab, and she's working on a special sort of chemical compound, a supermercury, that she's hoping will provide some practical use for the military. One day she meets a man named Tim Thatcher. They kind of meet in their music theory class in college, and they fall for one another. It's a beautiful romance, and their romance just builds and builds. And then finally, in an effort to impress Tim, Paige brings him to the lab and shows him the sort of super chemical compound that they're working on, the supermercury. When Tim touches it, even though he's wearing a hazmat suit, it ends up kind of bonding with his genetic makeup and completely altering his being. And as a result, he can run fast now. He has other powers, but again, because he's a rookie hero, he needs more training before he can get there. He asks Paige to sew him a costume, which she agrees to because she has that ability, because her father was a garbage man, and she developed those skills along the way. She also assists him with his training. She doesn't stop any of the bad guys, but she does have a background in science that helps him understand his own powers and what he's capable of. And I think that's pretty groovy, working side by side to some degree. Unfortunately, as they are working together and really building up their relationship, the music theory professor in their class, Dr. Alastair Augustus, which, like, with a name like that, you know some bad stuff is going down. He starts noticing their behavior changing, so he follows them around. Well, he notices that Tim has superpowers, for one, and he decides that he wants some of his own superpowers. So he asks Paige out on a sort of date, but says it's a professional outing. And immediately when she gets into his car, she realizes that something is amiss. And she tries to escape, but he captures her and demands they go back to her place, so that she can give him the super chemical, which she took home so that no more Kid Mercuries, which is Tim's superhero name. No more Kid Mercuries could be running around, because that would be dangerous. Very smart on her part. When they get back to her house, Tim, Kid Mercury, is waiting there, but he is unable to stop Alistair. Alistair shoots him, and because he's a rookie superhero, he makes a few mistakes. And so Alistair ends up making off with the chemical formula and becomes quite the supervillain in the process, threatening to take down all of New York City. This culminates in a battle on a bridge, where a overpowered Dr. Nocturne, as he calls himself, takes on Kid Mercury, and it results in Dr. Nocturne knocking Paige off the bridge, and in his effort to save Paige, he ends up snapping her neck, and she dies. And so Paige ends the story by noting that her death served to benefit Kid Mercury in the end, and he went on to form another relationship with a woman who actually listens to him and decides to stay home rather than getting involved in the fight against his wishes. And she also notes that she feels a little anger and sadness about the fact that she served to benefit his story, even though the mercury, the chemical, was her story. Like, that was her, and she wishes she could take it all back. As I mentioned in the beginning, I absolutely love this story. I love this short story because it's so fascinating, and it's such an interesting premise, and Catherynne, Valente, I feel she makes the most use out of the premise that she can, and including with the other stories. She tells a very fascinating story through multiple women in various aspects of comics. So I think that's a very interesting aspect of this this story. I may have forgot to mention, but the idea of fridging refers to, which is the title of the refrigerator monologue. So it refers to like fridging women, which is the idea that a woman in a comic book only serves to further the story of a man in a lot of ways. And it goes back to a comic book where the Green Lantern shows up, Alexander DeWitt. Like, he shows up at his girlfriend's place and he finds that she was stuffed into the fridge. An unceremonious death, and it only stands to further the character arc of the Green Lantern of the time, which is pretty horrible. So that's what you see in comic books, like women dying or being, sexually assaulted in some way, like Jessica Jones, who was in the Netflix show. She was sexually assaulted by Kilgrave, and that only stood to further like her arc and his arc, rather than serve any value to the plot as a whole. I would say that's fridging. So I just wanted to provide a little explanation for that. I really like how, Catherynne Valente uses this as an opportunity to talk about how women are portrayed in the comic books by using Paige here. This first happens when Tim gains his Kid Mercury powers. Paige is side by side with him, but she's more of a sidekick in a lot of ways. She sews his costume, and she serves to help train him. But it's not a full partnership, I don't think. Almost as if the comic book writers are saying that because she doesn't have powers, like, she can't be on the same level as him, even though she's a brilliant scientist and probably even far smarter than Tim Thatcher. She's not seen as an equal on his level. And this continues once Alistair finds out Tim's secret. She becomes more of a damsel in distress, particularly when Alistair invites her out on a date, and like, he uses her to gain an advantage on Tim. Alistair also knocks Paige off the bridge in an effort to distract him, and it's also kind of seen as Paige's fault when she hands over the chemical compound for the super mercury. So the writers are saying, oh, look at this helpless woman. She only stands to be in the way of everything, even though she wants to be like strong and powerful. It's kind of ridiculous how they just morph her character in that way, even though she's like a brilliant scientist, and she sees the theft of the super mercury as like her fault and something that she needs to fix rather than Kid Mercury needing to fix. Finally, there's the last way that women serve to exist in the comic books, which is with Paige's death at the very end. She's she's knocked over the bridge, and in his bid to save her, he ends up snapping her neck. You see that a la Spider-Man, when Spider-Man tried to save Gwen Stacy, he only ended up snapping her neck, and that served to like benefit his character arc and guide how he acted in other relationships, and it didn't really elaborate upon Gwen's character at all. She didn't even come back for several years after that. It only served to guide Spider-Man in a lot of ways. And here, it only serves to guide Kid Mercury. One thing that Paige notes is at the very end, she says, Tom's got a girl now who stays home when she's told. A good girl. A girl who leaves the fixing up to him. I was just the prototype. The Act 1 conflict who had to go so the story could grow a little more gravitas. Some days I'm okay with that. But some days I want to rise up out of the dark, rip open Kid Mercury's throat, and drink back every drop of my 2.21% solution. My fault, my mother, my Quicksilver, my speed, my strength, my story. So what you have there is Paige acknowledging that she was canon fodder, essentially. Like, she stood only to further Kid Mercury's development, like her death was a necessary evil to make everything seem more important overall in the story. And then, like, Kid Mercury immediately forgets about her because he finds a new girl, one who will obey his every command. And maybe it's the writers saying that, oh, strong women, like in comic books, that's unnecessary because a strong woman will only get herself hurt. So, like, I know comic books have changed since then, but I mean, have they completely? You still have the story of Oracle, Batgirl Oracle, who was shot in the back by Joker as a way of, like, Joker settling his score with Batman. It wasn't even about Oracle. It wasn't even about Batgirl. It was just there to, accentuate the Joker's evil and highlight the need for Batman to deliver more justice. And I don't know where else I'm going with that, but maybe comic books haven't completely changed, and that's worth thinking about as we read more of them, as we watch comic book movies even. One other thing that I really like about this story is Paige's anger, especially in the afterlife. One thing that she notes is that she, like many other women in this afterlife, are coming and going. Some are being rewritten, some are being retconned, some are being given another opportunity, like they're being reincarnated in the storyline. But for Paige, that's never happened. Once she died, she's stayed dead, which I think is very interesting because the comic book writers have found a use for those other characters. But for Paige, her only use, much like Gwen Stacy, much like Alexander DeWitt with the Green Lantern, her only use seemed to be creating creating a sort of death issue for the character. They have to deal with this death for the rest of their superhero lives, and maybe that provides some sort of like moral ground for the character to always think about. But it shouldn't come at the expense of a strong female character, a sidekick. It shouldn't come at like Paige's expense. Even though she's fictional, you still feel for her. You still get the sense that this is totally unfair to her. Characters like Kid Mercury get to thrive, and she just stays dead. And that's particularly heartbreaking and it makes me think a lot about this story, and I love that I'm left with that as I read the story. There's not much I don't like about the story. It's there's so much more to enjoy as you read each story, and given that it's about a different superhero in each section, I do like how Valente explores more aspects of women in comics. It's not just that women are being killed to further the male storyline. Sometimes they're completely rewritten so as to not undermine the male characters, so as to not make them seem less than, which is what the second story is about. It's written with a Jean Grey stand-in with the name Jean Grey switch, so there's no copyright error there. But it's another very excellent story, and I recommend you go seek it out. I recommend that you read this book if you can. It's pretty interesting. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this book. I do look forward to reading more of Catherynne and Valente's work. Particularly, she has one that I saw at the local library that I'm hoping to check out. Maybe even buy. It's probably better to do it that way. But I think it'd be great if I could find out more of her work, because if I like this, imagine what other myth punk I might like. If you have any comments you want to leave, you want to talk about women in comic books, comic book storylines, or if you want to comment on something that I said, feel free to comment below. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe. I look forward to talking more about Catherynne and Valente. I'm gonna remember her name one time. I look forward to talking more about Valente as time goes on, and learning more about how like women are portrayed in the media. That's always fun to read about. Until then, I bid you a pleasant time in your weird travels. Farewell.